Ah, Okay, so my name is Laurent Broto. I am managing director for PwC, and I'm mainly working on cloud security.
And my name is Susan Vrona Béjina. I am also a cloud consultant with the cloud transformation practice in PwC. And my area of specialization is development of digital products. And I manage the API Trust offer. And today we're going to talk to you about a broad framework for securing your APIs. So Laurent, if you could show the next slide, please. Thank you. So our clients come to us in the cloud practice with usually at least one of the following three subjects. The first being reduction of costs through move to cloud to take advantage of pay-as-you-go infrastructure. Secondly, to modernize their applications and take advantage of cloud native resources and services. And finally, how to rationalize their operations or reduce costs and or to create new products and services. And this is always something that can be done via the API. And so with the API trust approach, we help our clients to master the complete lifecycle of their APIs. And we can assist our clients either in the upfront activities for architecture and design. We can help with build all the way through test and validate, even run and deploy into production. And finally, through the aspects of optimization to make sure that they're meeting their service level objectives and the business objectives of their API strategy. And whenever we participate in API projects with our clients, we always pass through one of the three pillars that are described in the bottom part of this slide. So they may come to us with problems with respect to technical problems with respect to their APIs. Maybe they're having trouble with maintenance or performance, but a true 360 degree approach is going to pass through one of these three pillars and all of them. So the first being governance. So in developing your API strategy, are you sure that you know what business outcomes you're trying to achieve? Do you have the right organization in place, either a center of excellence or a center of enablement to give best practices and design pattern help to your developers? Are they tech enabled? Do they have the right tools in place? Have you evaluated the risk profile of the data and the assets that you're exposing via your API? And in terms of the second pillar, do you have, what is your build and test strategy? Do you have automation in place? Are you testing for conformity with respect to the API spec? Are you testing at all different levels of either integration, functional, or security? And are you testing in your development environments? Do you have a shift left mindset so that you're testing before things are getting into production or catching things before they get into production? And then finally, with respect to monitoring, how do you know that your APIs are performing as expected, meeting your business KPIs? And in terms of availability and responding to client expectations. And finally, do you know that the APIs that you're exposing are secure? Have you a complete catalog of APIs that are being monitored, and there are no APIs that are shadow APIs that are not being tracked? So as you can see, in each of these three pillars, there's always an element of security. And sometimes developers feel a little lost how to position themselves with respect to a larger security posture. And we have just the thing for you. And that's Laurent Broto, who is going to present to you our framework for securization of your API strategy. Laurent?
Yep, thank you, Susan. So why securing our API or your API? So in fact, bad security implementation leads to risks, even for very big companies. So for instance, Twitter in 2021, so they got a broken authentication, and following this vulnerability, more than 5 million accounts has leaked. Or Facebook the same year in 2021. So this time, in fact, what's happened? Too much data were published with through the API, and then more than 500 million accounts leaked. And Uber in 2019. So expose PI and authentication token of rider and driver following an API issue. So in fact, each time an API is exposed, this API is at risk, and this API must be secured. So to secure your API, we are just following, in fact, the NIST CSF framework, which is broken down into 5 pillars. So in this presentation, we will only speak about the 3 first pillar. So in fact, what is securing an API? So securing an API, in fact, is to ensure the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of the data, which will be published or not by the API. So the first thing is an identification phase. So in this identification phase, we will look at the different API you published or you exposed. Okay, so this is an API inventory, and therefore we should know exactly what data to protect, what data can be exposed, what data could not be exposed. Okay, and we need to know also on which standard do you want to be conformed to. Okay, so you can have a policy, a security policy, or you want to respect the standard published by some other standard regulation companies or something like that. Okay, so in this identification phase, in fact, we will look at the standards, the data, and the API. So once we'll have identified all these things, we go to the protect step. So in the protect step, we'll put in place all the primary controls and secondary controls, which will permit to securize your API. Okay, so these controls can be on the dev, on the development phase, so code securization or something like that, and on the operation phase, so implementation of the control, in fact, to mitigate the standard. So we are doing shift left and we are doing DevSecOps. And finally, even if everything is well protected, it can remain some holes in your security, right? So we will put in place some mechanism to be able to detect any deviation or to detect any abnormal activity or something like that, to be able, therefore, to respond and to recover. So concerning the identification phase, so once we have all your API and once we know your data, we must know how do you want to protect your API. Okay, so there are some market resources to help you to protect your API. So there is a OWASP. So the OWASP is an organization which performs a yearly study to check for the most vulnerability in the API. And every year, the OWASP top 10 is published with the major vulnerability. So broken authentication and authorization, unrestricted resource consumption, security misconfiguration, and this kind of thing. So the OWASP organization is working on broad domain security. So not only API, you will find a lot of top 10 from the OWASP in different domains. So there is a more specific domain to the API, so the Open API, so which is a specification which defines standard and programming language agnostic interface for the API. So in the Open API standard, we will find mainly some standards for authentication and authorization scheme. And there are a lot of breadth of best practices. So for instance, you can go to the Red Hat website or any other website, which will tell you, in fact, how you must protect your API following the best practices. So for instance, use token, use encryption, or these things, okay? So considering the Open API standard and this authorization scheme, considering the main vulnerabilities communicated by OWASP, considering the best practice, what we recommend you, in fact, is to build your own custom standards. Okay, why custom standard? So the custom standard will permit you to fit your security requirement in accordance with your security policies, in accordance with your maturity and something like that. So the goal, in fact, will be to have not a big standard, but some very important points and some very important bullet, in fact, some very important rules. And these rules, in fact, will permit you to achieve some quick wins, and in an iterative way, you will increase your security posture. So if you are coming from nothing, in fact, in terms of security, you can just add a rule, for instance, which can be, okay, we must use the encryption, okay? And you will modify your code, you will modify your environment to use encryption within your API, okay? And in the second iteration, you can say, okay, so now everything is encrypted. So we want to use a mutual TLS for the authentication, okay? So, and step by step, you will secure your API and you will increase your security posture. Okay, so on the side there are some example, and the benefit, in fact, is to have a clear view of what should be achieved in the short term and what will be a target, but not a target in some years, a very short term target and an iterative target. So, in fact, once we have the standard and everything, once the identification step is done, we will deploy the security control. So the security control should be in all the security domains. So it can be authentication. So for instance, using HTTP basic authentication, API key, OAuth, or something like that. Another thing which is very important is to sanitize the entries to avoid any code injection, because usually the API will request, for instance, a database. So if you are not sanitizing the entries, the inputs of the API, you can have a SQL injection vulnerability, for instance. So the encryption is very important. So the encryption on the network by using TLS, mutual TLS for the authentication. The encryption could be important as well for all the data at rest, but in fact, it will be more a classical security standard for your infrastructure. Because in fact, it's very important to have a secure infrastructure, because if you have a very secure API, but everything around the API is vulnerable, in fact, your attacker will not go through your API, but it can go through directly your host or your infrastructure. So we must implement a classical security control as well. And therefore, an important thing can be, in fact, all the slotting or something like that to avoid, in fact, heavy use of your resources, or in fact, to avoid heavy use of your resources. You can go, in fact, with a contract validation. So contract validation with a web application firewall, for instance, which will inspect all your traffic and will check if the traffic is conform to what it should be. Okay, and you can do vulnerability scan with Nessus, for instance, but in fact the vulnerability scan is more in the detect phase. So in the detect phase, we can imagine three different type of detection. So the first type of detection can be the configuration review. So for instance, if you are using a cloud gateway API or something like that, you want to be sure that there is no security deviation over time. So you can achieve it by a CSPM, which is a cloud security posture management. So the goal of the static review, of the static detection, will be to ensure that your security posture remains the same in the time, and there is no deviation. You can try to detect the vulnerability via pen test as well. So this is more dynamic, and you will try to pen test your API. So a pen test will take into account the environment, but we'll take into account the business around the API to try to see if there are some attack paths which will be able, in fact, to access to forbidden resources or forbidden data. And finally, there is a log-based detection. So the log-based detection, you can use CM or Elasticsearch, for instance. So the idea is to receive the logs of the infrastructure, of the API, of the different middleware you are using, to correlate these logs. And with log correlation, you will be able to identify some abnormal behavior. Okay, and you can also put business use cases into the log-based detection. So we can discuss it later, because now I'm a little bit late, and I will let Susan present you our different recs.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, all. A lot of great tips there. I think we can talk about a couple of them in this experience we had with the client. So our client, under the aegis of the anti-waste law that is in place in France, they created a fund, a repair fund, which allowed them to reimburse repairs of electronic goods. This was under the idea that reuse and reuse instead of throwing things away. So they basically are subsidizing repair costs for repairs. And repairs, and what they wanted to do was create a portal which exposed a service which would allow the repairs to get reimbursed for the discount that their clients received to repair their goods, and so that the repairer could receive be refunded. So there's money involved. There's a claim to submit, And so security is one of the biggest issues that our client faced, as in addition to the creation of a well-architected framework for exposing the service. So we for this client, we helped architect their API design, the urbanization of this API with respect to their infrastructure, from an internal perspective, they had SAP on the back end, SAP for HANA for the operational aspect of approving of the reimbursement claim. And there are some steps involved that involve transmission of documents to validate the claim. And this passed through an AWS architecture using S3 buckets. And we, in terms of security components, we leveraged the design leveraged AWS security services using Cognito and IAM schema in terms of users and permissions, and created an integration with the SAP backend to authenticate the users that were registered in the SAP backend, and the implementation of a secure approach in the API in terms of the request headers and encoding of information in the request body and not passing information along the URL. Taking advantage of the DynamoDB, which was used, encryption at rest, which is a feature out of the box of DynamoDB offered by AWS, encryption at rest. When documents were stored on disk, to prevent, because these documents were exposed in the portal that repairers used to check on the status of their claims and to see if their claims were complete and all the pieces that they sent to the claim were included. They had to be able to look at the documents in the S3 bucket, and in order to protect the fact that this was open as an API, those documents were encoded with a unique UUID, so that discovery of just if a malicious actor is poking around trying to get into this S3 bucket, they're not going to be able to discover any pattern with respect to what is being stored there. And finally, this secure approach allowed our client to have confidence in exposing their internal assets via an API. Their partners knew that their data was being protected, and that they were compliant with respect to GDPR and personally identifiable information, and of course protecting the business image of both our client and their partners who are using this API. So I think the next slide is just a very high-level view of the architecture, so I won't go into it because it's a little hard to read, and we've reached the end of our time. But both Laurent and I are available. We'd be happy to talk to you more if you have any questions after our talk. And here's our contact information. We have another talk later on in the conference. And also we have a product which helps clients detect their security, cloud security configuration of all their resources deployed in the cloud according to different standards that the client would that the client can choose themselves, and is 100% configurable, and we can assist you in your API and your cloud posture. So don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you'd like.
Thank you, Susan.